All right, I'm here with Sydney Gidabuday. Sydney, how are you, dude?
Doing well, doing well. Just hanging out. It's right after a couple days after Christmas. Certainly like recovering from just hanging out and uh being a little bit extra busy. But yeah. Thankful for just like a few off days in between the holidays and work and just kind of the rush of the end of the year.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk to you about training over the years, starting with high school, that kind of stuff, going through college, and then your professional career. You and I kind of have this conversation probably like every 6 months on the phone, so I thought it'd be fun to get down and just talk about it here.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
First, I wanted to talk about like when you and I met, I had recognized your name. So we met. It's been like what, 10 years since.
Yeah. 2015.
Yep,
Yeah.
at Adams. And so I recognized your name because I had been at Riverside City College, and I was a huge like running numbers nerd, and I would just like sift through all the record books, and I recognized the name Gitabadai from some of our record books from the 90s at Riverside. And
Yeah.
so when
Yeah.
so when we met, I brought that up to you, and you were like, "Oh yeah, my dad went to Riverside."
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, my dad Wilhelm would have been, some of the record holders. He would have held a few records at Riverside, and yeah, he came out I think in the mid '90s, like maybe 1994 or so, and ran for the famous coach Ted Banks, I think. Uh, I, and I think he kind of had this dream from Tanzania, and um, like he had this just dream in general to come out to the U.S. And I think running became that method of coming out and so yeah, he came out here. He ran I think 2 years, and I should know a little bit more honestly, but I know he spent 2 years in California and ran like the 4 mile state championship for community college and um yeah, and had a good time, and that kind of like catapulted like his next decade or so of running in the US. Um, in that time, I was born in 1996, and then I moved back, but he decided to stay back here, like through college and through road racing and making a little bit money here and there, um, and so yeah, I'd say yeah, my dad was kind of the like, I mean, he's the whole reason I'm here, um, and yeah, it started off with just like this kind of, I think, just personal dream of his to come and visit the U.S. I don't really know how long he intended to stay. I think it may have just started from a curiosity more than anything.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. That's like, I mean, it's a cool story that he came and then you ended up here because of that. So you went back to Tanzania and lived there for how long?
For 5 years. So yeah, I was born in '96, late '96, and then was here for about 2 years, or in California, but in the U.S. for about 2 years, and then moved to Tanzania until I was 7, and in that time, I lived with my mom, and my dad would kind of come back to visit as he, did road races and sent money over. Like um, running was just like a way that he supported us, and I think it was like a fun way for him to support us, um, but also just being in the States in general, like almost regardless of what you're doing, the money that he made here went pretty far in Tanzania, and so he was motivated to be apart from us, and I think it worked out. I think it made him happy, and it gave him a lot of connections, and obviously gave me some connections once I made it back.
Yeah, sweet. That's cool. A lot of people, I think, everyone knows that runners, especially in the 90s and 2000s, were coming from Kenya and living here, and same thing, trying to support some family back home. It's kind of more of a rare story from other East African countries. So that's cool to hear about. And then you moved back over to the U.S. when?
In 2003, when I was like I just turned 7 years old. And so yeah, I moved here with the intention of living with my dad, and I think the idea would be to kind of bring my whole, the whole family out to California. My mom, me, and my dad would stay there, and I think through the just kind of the struggles of immigration and Tanzania being, maybe not a common like a country with like a very wide pipeline of immigrants to the U.S. I think that made things a little bit hard, and so from there I started living with a good friend of my dad's, Juan Ramirez, and I think at first it was kind of a temporary situation, and that turned into kind of the rest of the time that I was going to school and up until college, and so yeah, I'd say there was like from December 2003 to April of 2004, it was kind of like this big, huge changes for me. I think, I was 7, and so I didn't really understand it all, and it feels like I still kind of piece it together. But really, like the major points that I know is that I moved, came back in December of 2003, started elementary school that like after the winter break, I started second grade in early 2004, and then soon after that started living with the Ramirez family. My dad kind of went out to Tanzania to see if there was like a better way for both he and my mom could come out, and yeah, that few month stay with them turned into uh, about 10 years, just over 10 years, and that kind of really like my family unit really changed, and certainly with like some struggle and with some confusion from my end, but I gained a brother and later gained a couple of younger siblings, and so it was like in the end it worked out, and I still feel very happy to have like grown my family, but it's such a muddy period in my upbringing that I'd say like I almost don't even know the absolute facts of it, but yeah, so from there, that's kind of where my running started. It didn't necessarily, I always knew running was going to be a part of my life, but Juan was kind of the person who really kickstarted the actual the actual physical part, the actual like running. And so I had a lot of passion for it before, but I had zero idea how to actually start, and so yeah, and kind of just like a weird series of events. Like it's like the passions I had really never really ended, but um, kind of the structures around me changed, and so yeah.
Right. Thanks for sharing. That's really cool. And I can't imagine how hard that would be to navigate. Like you said, as a 7-year-old,
Hmm.
and you don't really even know what's going on or like why you're moving or why parents are coming or not coming. And then I know you mentioned also at the time, like in Tanzania, the primary language was Swahili, right?
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
your family with Juan and his family, their primary language was Spanish.
Hmm.
And so I'm sure that was also just super interesting. And you're going to school in English, and both of your families, that's not the first language that they speak. So I think you've just had one of the most unique upbringings.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. No, that was like a challenge. I think I was already a pretty quiet kid, and so I'm so thankful I had my brother Jonathan, who was also born in the States, and so English was more so his primary language when it came to communicating with friends and everything, and so it was easy for me to like kind of compartmentalize where it was like I could focus on learning English with him, and then I was slowly picking up Spanish at home just because that was the primary way of communicating, and I've eventually like I wouldn't say I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, but um, I could get around, you know. I think like I try to think of it as like I could speak like I'm 8 or 10 years old in Spanish, and you know, but my English has, you know, my English really replaced my Swahili, and um, you know, for the most part, I don't think that I sound like English is my second language, but it is, which is it's kind of a, I guess it's a cool little fact, but you know, maybe I can be trilingual one day.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, just everyone's story is different, and running can make it even more interesting. Like you talked about a little bit about Juan starting you with running. Could you maybe talk some more about that? And then I know you've mentioned to me that he coached you for quite a bit of high school. And so maybe could you talk about how you got into running with him and what that influence was like, and then some of the stuff that you did with him in high school?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think, you know, he was a runner with my dad, and so he went out for his daily runs, and he, you know, like I always like I knew that that was like a huge part of his life, and so I think in terms of me knowing that I would run one day, I felt like there was no break, and it was kind of like he led by example, kind of, and I understood that, you know, my day would come, and um, you know, I'd say the first like moments where I was like, oh, I really like this and I want to, you know, I want to pursue this is was like elementary like presidential tests, you know, like you know, I'm not sure if that's as common now, but um I know it's kind of gone in and out through the years, but yeah, we just had like a simple mile run, and my my fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Gutman, kind of really took it upon herself to like, you know, just to make it happen. And we practiced all year long for like fifth grade, and we eventually had this trial. And you know, like it meant so much to me. You know, I had zero frame of reference. Like I would just go out and I would like run really hard. And at the time, you know, there was like another student, a fifth grade girl that was just crushing it. Like I don't think she had a background in running at all, but she just kind of had that talent. And so like it was like something that I was like, oh, I want to be competitive. I want to be the fastest fifth grader. And so I'd say like that was like a very kind of like clear period in my life where I was just like, you know, I have this like long-term goal. I know we're gonna have this like big trial, and yeah, you know, I put a lot of chips into it in the end. I didn't run extremely fast. I ran like 7:53 for 1 mile when I was in fifth grade, so nothing out of this world at all. Like, you know, I think the average fifth grader could maybe do that. I don't know, but yeah, that was like a huge moment, and I remember telling Juan, like my father figure, my dad at the time, and just being like, oh, like I ran so fast, it was great. Like I didn't really know whether it was fast or not, but it just felt like, you know, I accomplished my goal. And yeah, and I think from there that was like the beginning of my own journey where I would go out for like a 2 mile jog every few weeks. It wasn't like I didn't understand how consistent you had to be or anything like that, but I was just like, oh, like I'll go out, and you know, there was a park that was about a mile from our house, and so I would like run to the park, and then maybe I'd take a break, then I'd run back, and um yeah, and so yeah, that like just started this journey. And I think Juan, being kind of the adult in the situation, understood that like those gears were turning in my head, and so I think he, you know, he started to include us in some of the road races that he would go to. And um you know, we would just go to watch, and you know, if there was like a kids race, we would join as well. Um and so yeah, it was like a very slow like introduction to it, and I think that's like something that was deliberate from him. I think like he, you know, he understood that like that was me not being his own son. You know, he didn't want to over overwork me or push me too hard. You know, I think I would have been ready to start going, but you know, but I think he was cautious, and you know, I think it was like a good thing that he waited. And And so yeah, I mean, if I jump forward to like middle school, we had more like regular mile runs that were timed, like through PE, and we had like a record book that was like in our locker room where we would just get dressed for PE and so yeah, that kind of that started to give me like a little bit more frame of reference of like this is what a really good seventh grader runs, like seventh grade girl, seventh grade boy, eighth grade girl, eighth grade boy, and that kind of like started to like really give me like what I was shooting for. And again, I didn't really run all that fast in middle school. I think our eighth grade record was like 5:02, I think 5:02 or 5:04 for the mile, and I mean I only ever ran like probably 6:30 give or take, and so it was it was like something that it was like very aspirational where I was just like, oh, I'm gonna do it one day, but I still didn't know like what it took, like the structure and the consistency it took. Yeah, and so I think eighth grade came around, and then that's when Juan was like, all right, like why don't we go for jogs here and there? Um, and so yeah, he started to sprinkle in like his warm up with my run, and yeah, from there, like I felt like, oh, I'm training now, and I ran, maybe the second half of eighth grade, I ran like 10 miles a week, maybe like, it probably wasn't even worth like counting, but I ran a couple times a week, with him, and um, that was enough for me to like break 6 minutes in the mile by the end of eighth grade. Um, I never really broke six in the PE trials in eighth grade, but I broke six like just at practice with Juan, and uh, that was like one of those like moments of success that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like this is great. Like this, it kind of similar to running 750 3 years before. Like I really like latched onto it. Like I feel like in retrospect, these aren't like very crazy times at all, but I really, really enjoyed like just the being able to like make strides in something like that. And so yeah, from there, like it kind of it started, high school was up next, and then that's when I was really in it. I ran 4 or 5 times a week, and probably 3 to 4 miles each time, Um, and I'd say like that's kind of the start of training. I think since then I probably haven't taken more than like a month off of running.
Right.
And yeah, just because like I've enjoyed it, so much. Like I definitely understand why we take breaks, and it's always nice to take a week after a season or whatever. But yeah, from then, I mean, I think like I've run just about every week, minus a few, breaks after big seasons or big races and stuff. But
You put up something on Strava. I don't know. It was sometime this year. And you said that you added up all of your mileage from, was it the last 10 years?
yeah,
Basically
yeah,
since high school, and
mhm,
you'd ran on average 10 miles a day or more when you added it all up.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think a little bit of it is perhaps like a guessing game, but because like I think before 2016, I just didn't. I had a GPS watch, but I didn't like save the data. So, but based on what I was at Adams already in 2015, and so I was kind of guessing around 10 miles. But this year, I think certainly the last decade, um, I'll be over like hopefully approaching 11 miles a day, uh, which is yeah, it's like it feels cool. It's like something that like I feel prideful for, where I'm like, oh yeah, I've been consistent, and um, I'm certainly trying to use it for like future goals as well because there aren't many people that have run as consistently as I have in the last 10 years. It's I'd like to think I'm in like an elite field of like a 1% of training time over the last decade.
I think so. I had a coach one time who I'd been injured, and
Hmm.
I wanted to ramp up my mileage, and I was like, I felt like I had to catch up, and I was like, yeah, I want to run like 70 or 80 miles a week already, and
Hmm.
he forced me to sit down, and I had training journals, and so he said, go back and add up your miles for the last 2 or 3 years, and give me the average per week of that,
Hmm.
and it was like 30 miles a week or something.
Yeah.
And he made me do it to show me that he's like, yeah, if you're just trying to like run a ton and then you get hurt, or run a bunch and then you get sick, that long-term consistency isn't happening, and so you're not really getting much better over time if you're not consistent. Like, you have these
Yeah.
bouts of training where you gain some fitness, but you lose it by being out so often. So I
Yeah.
think that's pretty cool that, like you said, you're just recognizing that longevity, and that you're pretty in a pretty small group, have being one of the only people that, just for 10, and like you said, a few years even before that, not measuring anything but probably running quite a bit consistently.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think, in high school, I didn't run 70 miles a week. If I were to like do a quick guess, it's like, probably like 20 to 30 my freshman year of high school, you know, probably something similar, 30 to 40 my sophomore year, and it's probably just like a 10-mile jump each year. But yeah, it definitely, thinking about it, like, it gives me the kind of that pride for now, but also brings like a lot of memories because um yeah, that 4 years was like on top of the miles that I ran, it's like me and Juan connected so much by just like, being able to travel to races, whether it was, a 40-minute drive there, 40-minute drive back to a cross country race or a road race or whatever. And, um, I think it's like all the miles I've run are like really intertwined with like so many good memories. And so it's like, it kind of, it's like if my running took a hard break right now, it's like I would have like kind of packed it all in with like so much, so many memories and so many positive things. And so I hope it's not done anytime soon, but I think it's one of those things that I didn't think about maybe 5 years ago or 8 years ago when I was in college, but because I just didn't have the hindsight.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit about what you did in high school, like some of the training Juan had you do, how that kind of prepared you to go to college, and you were pretty successful pretty quickly in college. And having talked to you a little bit about some of the training that you did with Juan, I think there's a good reason for that. Also, uh, seems like he just showed a ton of wisdom in like letting you have that excitement for running, but not doing the overbearing parent thing of like, oh, you like running? Let's sign you up for every single 5K and every USATF event that we can find, and just like
Yeah,
grind it out, which makes kids run fast, but then they're kind of burnt out sometimes before
yeah,
they even get to college.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with just in Southern California, I remember seeing like once I was in high school, but I was still doing road races. I would see small, like youth groups that would do races, and there would be 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds that are running so fast that I remember thinking like, wow, if they're running this fast at 9, 10, 11 years old, like they're going to be so fast in high school. Um and in the end, as I grew up and as I got older and I watched some of the local kids grow up, it's like it wasn't always true, some kids did end up running really fast. But yeah, some kids didn't end up like running as fast as I maybe projected when I was like closer to their age. Um and so yeah, I think that like I'm super thankful for that, and it's made me a little bit more resilient, because I think he didn't weigh me down with like all the opportunities that we could do when I was 12 years old. He just kind of, it was kind of like a a drip feeding of like things that I could possibly do, um, and yeah, and so it was good. But I think that like, also like that continued into early high school, where um, we had a high school coach, and in my opinion, like I think he did a fine job, but it wasn't all that great. I remember Juan being maybe a little upset because, I think as a freshman, I'd only ever run like, or the summer before freshman year, I'd only ever run like 4 or 5 miles is my max run. But at some point in that first cross country season, I think I got up to like 9 miles of running. Really now that's obviously not a big deal, but like back then, I think Juan felt like a little protective of that because, I think that was like an instance where like perhaps that was too much to double up on like the mileage that I'd ever done as a you know 14-year-old at the time, and yeah, and so I think he even his like training and the actual workouts that he would have preferred me to do were much smaller. I think he like didn't really want me to just run heavy miles out the gun, and try to like and he didn't want to like push me too much even on like that smaller scale of like the daily training. And so yeah, so I survived my freshman year. It wasn't too bad. I ended up running, you know 16, we did 3 miles for California cross country. I ran like 16:52 for 3 miles, and that was like an okay. I felt like 17 minutes was kind of that big goal that I'd set for myself. I think much like that 6 minute mile of eighth grade year, 17 minutes for 3 miles was like kind of that new barrier to break. And so I was pretty happy to cross that barrier. But I think one interesting moment in like in that like month that I ran 16:52 for 3 miles, we took our break as a team for high school. Juan was like, "Oh, we should get ready for a turkey trot." I think we ended in like early November, like November 2nd or something like that. And our Dana Point turkey trot, which is one that we raced together, is in 3 weeks or so.
So
That
for anyone listening, when Sydney says we raced that together, um, he means when he was 14 and I was 19. I think he solidly beat me at that race. Uh, I, I I don't remember the exact year, but I'll have to find that result.
yeah, I mean, I guess if I remember correctly, I think it was 2010 maybe. So yeah, now it's yeah just over 15 years. But well, we don't have to look up the results now. But the but yeah, I remember like an interesting feeling because I was super stoked on 16:52 for 3 miles, and this was going to be a 5K. And I think I don't remember the exact things that we did, whether it was rest more or do a specific workout, but I ended up running 16:47 for 5K. I kind of I remember kind of recognizing like a bit of like a certain value that like Juan brought into the equation, where I think I think one of the mistakes that like we often make as runners and coaches is sometimes like we overdo it. We over like we just overtrain, especially leading into a big race. And I think for my league final that I ran, where I ran 16:52, I was probably a little overcooked, a little bit tired. And so over the next 3 weeks, I think, Juan just kind of did a good job of like building my confidence to run to like so that I could run a little bit faster, but also like just recovering my body, because I'd gone through. like the heaviest period of training in my life, which was also just the first 6 months of training in my life. And so, yeah, I just remember thinking, wow, that's crazy, like 5K is 200 meters longer. I ran 5 seconds faster you know, for that course, and really, I'm like a 16:10 3 mile runner or something like that, and so I just like saw value in that. I kind of like understood like Juan had a certain wisdom to him, and that kind of I feel like that started this like trust in him, that I still have to till today, like I remember feeling like this very specific, just like wow, he knew I didn't really understand again exactly what we did, but it was it was such a great feeling because I could kind of really like attribute the success that I had to him, whereas before my high school season, it felt like I was just running hard to run hard and just kind of being hopeful, like a little bit more blind. And so, yeah, that was like a really big moment for myself. And yeah, that led on to the spring season where we had a different coach for high school track. Um, I think she did a really good job. She helped me run like 4:36 for 1600 meters, and that was like a huge jump from like 5:50 the previous year. Um, and so yeah, that was great. That was like again just like a big chunk off. I didn't really have a big aha moment with that, but I was very stoked to break 5 minutes in the mile, and I ended up running, yeah, like something that it felt like I didn't even dream of at the start of the season, and so yeah, so that's like freshman year. I know,
I think that's a lot of high schoolers. That's kind of the experience is like you have a couple of little breakthrough runs that make you really feel like you're doing something,
yeah,
and then you start to enjoy the sport more. And like you said, you had one kind of guiding you in that. So let's fast forward to by the end of high school. Um, maybe you can say a couple of your high school PBs or some of the accolades you had. I know you did pretty well, which
hmm
got you recruited by a handful of schools, and then maybe talk about what you did with Juan, kind of getting ready for some of those big moments.
yeah, of course, yeah. So I mean, like after freshman year, I think like things changed a little bit, and so I decided to, we kind of both decided that I'd be more successful, uh, working with him a little bit more primarily. And so yeah, that like I'd say that like led into my senior year. It felt like my sophomore, junior year really led me into that senior year, and um, I ended up running 4:09 for 1600 meters my senior year, um, 9:05 for 3200, and 14:26 for the track 5000. And so yeah, I think like once I was able to kind of work under the plan of Juan, like I think it was much easier for him to, kind of guess what was coming up and kind of draw out like a plan rather than trying to piece together things at the end of whatever high school training I did. And so, through the years, it feels like the workouts were very similar. Just like they were progressed, as I grew up. And I feel like I remember doing just like a lot of like we do 2 track sessions a week. And the most common one was just like short reps on short rest, where we would do like, when I was a sophomore, I would probably do like 6 to 8 times 200 meters with a 100-meter jog, and then like 4 400s with 200-meter jog, and then another like 4 to 6 200s with a 100-meter jog again. And it was all continuous. Juan called it a tempo. Um, it's maybe more like a fartlek. But I think his idea was that like he wanted me to just kind of go in and out of running like a fast pace, but come down and recover in a short period of time, and then rev up the engine again, just over and over for, at the time, like probably 20 minutes or so. Um, and I think he called it a tempo because we were just hovering around like a threshold. Uh, I don't know if that was totally his intention. I don't, he didn't explain the science to me. He just told me like this is the goal. It's like we want to be consistent throughout the workout. Maybe we can close out the workout a little bit faster, but we want to start off at a sustainable level. And so yeah, that was like one that I feel like was very common. I mean, I've probably like I've done it countless times. Not recently, but for the 3 years that ended my high school career, like I did that so many times, and um, yeah, I think it was a good way to teach me how to be tough in a certain way, but also not overwork me because like by the end of it, I was breathing pretty hard. I wasn't I wasn't overworking it for too long, I was just going 200 meters at a time where I would run pretty hard and then I'd back off for 30, 35 seconds of the 100-meter jog and then
How
I'd do
quick
it
are
again.
how quick are you running those 200s?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was around a 15-minute 5K runner, so my junior year, I bet I would start at like 35 seconds for 200 meters. So I'd probably run 35, 36 to start, and then I would run the 400s around like 72, and then I would close out those last six 200s and maybe 33, 32, 31 if I had it.
Hmm.
I think I was just like a young runner, and I don't know if those 32s and 31s were extremely necessary, but I I just like felt like, oh, I have to finish out the workout fast, and so yeah, like I think it just ended up being roughly 5K pace down to mile pace or
Hmm.
800 pace maybe if I felt great. Um, and so yeah, it's funny. I now like with my current program, I do like similar work and I think it's roughly the same idea. Um, and so like it's like something that's super fun for me to do now because like I have this like memory attached to it.
Right. I was gonna say that's for so I think most high school kids, even now, are they're not doing that type of like threshold modulation work or flux training or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
Um, High schoolers are typically just like, hey, I'm going to do 10 by 400 as hard as I can with as much rest as coach will let me have. So it's typically like 3 minutes rest or 4 minutes rest or something, um, or 10 times 200 or whatever the standard workout is.
Hmm.
And I think looking at when you got to Adams State, where the training was very threshold based, you
Hmm.
had you had like some immediate success or pretty close to immediate success.
Hmm.
I'm guessing because of a lot of that threshold and like higher end threshold modulation work that you were doing. Um,
Hmm.
and I want to talk about it in a little bit, but uh, at at the time that we were at Adams, Clayton Foster was the assistant coach, and he told me just some cool stuff about when you tested your VO2 max. But we can get to that in a bit. So don't let
Yeah.
me interrupt. Let's talk about the rest of your high school training that you want to talk about.
Yeah, of course. No, no. I mean, I'd say that's like if I were to pick out workouts, that's like a you could kind of fan out from that kind of workout and pick almost any distance. And I feel like we did it. We would do sometimes we do 300s with 100 jog, and that was like a common one as well. Where that I feel like I don't quite remember the paces that I would run. Like maybe I would start 50, 51 and try to cut down a little bit with a 100-meter jog. But yeah, so I think for the most part, that felt like a key workout and like one of the most memorable types of workouts that we did. Um, and then yeah, by senior year, I think like I had graduated to the point where I could do a little bit more of like the um, common like known workouts. Like, I think I did 4 by mile for like 6 or 8 weeks straight. And it was just like, I think it was just the classic VO2 workout where I would run, 4 times a mile and I would take 4 minutes break. I was running pretty fast for the time. I think I would run like 4:38 down to like maybe 4:32. Um, and it was like a truly hard workout where I would just show up to the track and I knew it was gonna hurt. Um, but I think yeah, again, like you said, it set me up to get to Adams and have had this kind of like super high work rate for compared to other kids. And then with like the introduction of threshold, I think like that was probably the piece that I was missing. And yeah, it's like it took me about a year at Adams, and I felt like I had huge jumps because of it. And I think like with high school, I made like a lot of personal mistakes in terms of the training that I did and the training that Juan assigned, because I just felt like I always wanted to push, and I kind of felt like the end of high school felt like, oh, I really want to go out and I want to break 14 minutes in the 5K, or I want to run 4:02, 4:03 in the mile. Like I had these huge goals, and um, I got a little too focused on what on the exact times, and so I think you know I think I stepped in the way a bit of the plan of Juan, because I think I overworked myself in April, and had to kind of pay for that in early June and the early championship season. Um, I thankfully made it to the end of I made it to state in the end, but I I only made it to state in the 1600 meters, where my dream was to make it in both the mile and the 2 mile. And I think yeah, part of that is like being just like the young athlete. I was very excited and very um, I just I wanted it a little too much, like where I felt like I could hit my goal on just like any one given day. Um, and I'd say like that's like the thing that I would probably change almost immediately if I could put myself uh in my 17-year-old body. I'd be like, I'll just pull back like 2 or 3% early in the season so that I could make it to June and hopefully run that 14 flat 5K or that 4:03 mile or whatever. But yeah, in the end, just to tie it to an accolade, I ended up being third in the 1600 at state. And that was like, after a pretty rough early postseason, that was like such a huge win. I think it's probably the best finish my high school's ever had at a state championship. Actually, well, we may have had one in the eight. I think we had a state champ in the 800, but in the 1600, it was the best finish. And so yeah, that kind of led to Adams State. I signed my letter of intent in Fresno, California, like I think in between the prelim of the 1600 and the final of the 1600 in Fresno State, or no, at Buchanan High School in Fresno for the state champs. And so, it felt like it all kind of came together nicely where I committed very late compared to other kids.
Did
And
Coach Martin bring that letter to you,
no, it
or
was just
was that mailed to Fresno, or
it
how
through
did that?
fax.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah, it was like the hotel fax machine. And so I think I got the fax number for Adams and just like asked the lobby if if I could fax the my signed letter. And yeah, yeah. So it was super fun. It was kind of like it was this moment that like me and Juan had together where it was like, okay, like, you know, I didn't really expect to leave home or go too far from home. And so that kind of started this like new journey, and it like came at the right time where I like had success at the end of high school and kind of like opened the door to the next opportunity.
I mean, that's a cool story. That's really cool that like most people don't get to share. They might share that experience with a coach, but the fact that you got to share it with a parent who is also your coach was pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Adams State then. You naturally moved us into it. So I'm just gonna rattle off some of your accolades while at Adams, and you can correct me if I have them wrong. Um, you were twice top 10 in cross country while at Adams.
hmm
13 times All American, 6 times individual national champion, or is it
Seven.
7? Okay,
hmm
so I had 3 times in the 3K, 2 times in the 5K indoor, 1 time 5K outdoor. What did I miss?
Uh, no, I think it was one outdoor 5K and then three indoor 3K and three indoor 5K.
Okay, okay,
Because yeah, I think it was freshman year was three, which was indoor 3K, 5K, and then outdoor 5K, and then I think the next year was just the 3K, and then the following year was double indoor 3K, 5K, and then it was just the 5K my senior year or fifth year.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
cool. And then 2 times you were on a winning national team.
hmm
You ran a 401 mile, 342 1500, 754 3K, 1329 5K, which until 2020, Michael Aish and Kip Chariot had ran faster in Division Two, and then you're probably one of the last people to run under 1330 in a non-super shoe in Division Two.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think so, yeah.
I just remember both you and I were hanging on to those New Balance 800 spikes well past when we should have. Uh,
Yeah.
and 2902 for the 10K. Yeah, so what I'd like to talk about is like that's a like an insane career that just in 4 years. So what I want to talk about is like what kind of training does someone do to get in that kind of shape?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is much more clear, like compared to high school, I felt like I had to piece a lot of it together. It felt like, you know, I think for the better, I didn't really care about it in high school, or I cared about the day, but then I didn't think about a workout. And I think the thing with Adams and being in college is that Coach Martin really took the time to explain the reasoning for all the workouts. I think that kind of made me more invested in what I was doing day to day, but also long term. And so I think this can be a lot more detailed, because I even wrote some logs. I should have maybe brought them to kind of gloss over, but it was all pretty simple. I think Coach Martin had I feel like a very similar approach with the younger athletes where, you know, uh, we would typically redshirt our first year if we were, 18-year-old freshmen. If we didn't transfer from another college system or we weren't older, we would typically take a year as a redshirt and kind of get used to the lifestyle in Alamosa, the training, school, and all that. And I think that was like perfect for me, and it allowed me to do the tempos. Like it allowed me to like get them right. Where when I first got to Adams, I thought like a lot like high school. I was just like, I'm gonna run this 5 mile tempo hard. I'm just gonna run with the top guys until I can't. Um, and that didn't necessarily work out. I didn't really improve all that much until I really understood what the point of it was. And yeah, I think once I got it down, you know, the the main points of our training were just, relatively high mileage, and you know, that could be a little bit different person to person, but for me, it was about 90 miles a week. My freshman year, I think I would touch triple digits every once in a while. Like that first, I guess the first summer that I stayed in Alamosa after my redshirt year, I think I peaked at about 100 or 101. And so yeah, relatively high miles, one tempo a week, which was at, a fairly easy tempo, like it was, I mean, for the road miles, I think I was running 520 pace. For our Alamosa miles, I was probably running like 525, 530, even maybe even slower for like actual GPS miles. I think like that was super helpful. I think like that's what it takes to create like a long-term aerobic engine. It is kind of boring stuff. It is just like high-end work that you're not like burning at, and I think like that was the piece that really changed me as a runner. I think those like Tuesday harder workouts, I felt like, oh, I've done those. I've done workouts at a harder effort, whether it be 10K effort or 5K effort. But it felt like those were just like easy for me to get done. Um, but the weekly Friday tempos were just like something that once I really understood what they were for and the feeling that I was supposed to look for, I felt like that was like the key. Like if I were to take on a group of young athletes, whether it's like high school or college, I would just like start with the basic aerobic tempo. I know that's like what coach would say at high school camp as well, and it feels like the most time efficient as well, because it's like, it could be as short as 25 minutes and as long as like 40 minutes, but really you warm up, you change shoes, you do some strides maybe, and then you get on it, and it's not like a super demanding workout. And so you could do it in all kinds of conditions, whether it's cold out or it's warm out, like little adjustments can make it manageable. So yeah, yeah, I think that first cross country season paired with the paired with the Friday tempo, we would just do like fartleks on Tuesdays. I feel like we would do grass fartleks when we could. There wasn't a ton of grass in Alamosa, and as I was preparing for my own recent like cross race, I was realizing like, we didn't do a ton of grass workouts in Alamosa. We would do kind of the famous lappers, which I know you remember, and that's like your favorite workout, Brian, but or
Yes, yeah.
maybe not your favorite, but like
No, that's
it's
my
one that
favorite. That's
yeah.
um, anyone who's coached by me, at some point they're going to do either 600-meter reps on the grass or 2-minute reps, because I think that's
Hmm.
one of the best ways to just like stimulate your heart aerobically, dip a little over threshold, and then come back down in that
Hmm.
fartlek. So yeah, the lappers at Adams State, for anyone listening, is there's an inside. So Cole Park is where we do a lot of our mile reps,
Hmm.
and then inside Cole Park is this 600-meter grass loop, and a pretty standard workout was something like anywhere from 10 to 15 times 600 with pretty short recovery, like 60 to 90 seconds
Yeah.
at about 10K effort.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I felt like that really it like connected, it's like it's easy to connect that to a race because it certainly got harder. The last couple of reps were hard. And I felt like that was like a good time to put yourself in a race situation outside of a race. And also when it came to the team component, as well. Like it was good for us to run together in that setting and to, yeah, just like really just work hard, because there wasn't really a time associated with it. I feel like week to week, if it was muddier or if like the grass was wet or whatever, it's like the times almost didn't matter. Um, but yeah, yeah. So I felt like Tuesday sessions were a little bit more of what I kind of like took in as like, oh, this is when I work hard. I think one one workout that I remember that I still feel like I like to do to this day for road racing is just like miles on at Cole Park. I think that's kind of I remember doing 6 or 7 by mile at Cole Park. Um, with you as well. I mean, I think it was like the whole group. I remember Dom was there, Jackson. Um, I feel like Chad, Kyle, like it was just like the full group, and we I think we started off a little slow. It's just shy of a mile, so for the altitude conversion, but I mean, I think I remember starting in like the low 440 range, like 442 to 444, and cutting down to like sub 430 for that loop, and um, I remember the like that's like one of those workouts where paired with like a long period of tempos, it made me feel strong, because I was able to run 430 pace or 440 pace, and like it didn't feel like I was running extremely fast. It felt like I was just like I was certainly breathing heavy, but it didn't feel like my legs were like burning too much. It didn't feel like I was racing. It felt like I could hold this like high percentage of my all out speed without like feeling like I was going to drop out at any one moment, and you know, I give a lot of like I think at the time I gave a lot of credit to workouts like that, because I was just like, oh, that's the workout that made me finish sixth at nationals or made me finish X place at nationals. Um, but really, it was like just the aerobic stuff that we did from the beginning of summer. And so yeah, like I think Adam's training has changed since then a little bit. But I think in broad strokes, it's a very similar idea. I think they are doing a little bit more double threshold, um, and like broken up threshold now. But I think the idea is still very, very much the same. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if you've kept up with that.
Yeah, I think I've talked a little bit with Chris, who still lives there and teaches at Adams, and Kyle, who coaches as an
Hmm.
assistant coach there. And it sounds like they keep the basics pretty much the same. It's threshold based training, high volume. They've just adapted with as everybody's kind of adapted to the fact that with the better shoes and better track surfaces, you can work more and sooner. So you can do double threshold workouts. You can do maybe a little higher volume in the workout and not be as wrecked. Versus like when we were there, like you said, if you ran too hard on like uh, a Friday 5 mile tempo, and I just talked with J Cole, and he mentioned that it also depended on like how washboarded out the road was.
Hmm.
So the road was super sandy, and if it was really windy, you'd get these big washboards that was kind of like just the whole road was bumpy.
Yeah.
And so like when we were there, if you ran, and I'm sure it's still the case, like if you ran your 5 mile to 8 mile threshold run too hard, and then you came back Sunday and you ran your long run too hard, which I was very often guilty of,
Yeah.
um, you couldn't you you wouldn't be able to do the Tuesday workout very well, which like you said
Yeah.
was like it was really important to be able to do that Tuesday workout at a high intensity, at
Hmm.
race pace or faster than race pace, and you're at 7,500 feet. So I think they're probably just like a lot of college programs. I think they're able to do slightly more now and at a slightly higher intensity.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So I mean, but I feel like it's kind of just like moved up. I guess the whole running world has like, moved up all, I guess, like the tide lifts all boats kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
idea where it's like we've all leveled up like the kind of training we can do, even if it's, yes, rooted in the same ideas.
right. No, it's really cool to see. I've really enjoyed watching everyone just get faster and faster, and Adams State continue to be a school that puts out good runners. On the subject of running too hard on a Sunday run, I wanted to make sure I asked you about. Um, there was one Sunday run that uh, you had like you had missed the Sunday workout for whatever reason, like you were sick and pushed it to the next day, or
Hmm.
um, slept in or something. And so Jackson and I drove with you for your long run.
Hmm.
Do you remember what I'm talking about? This is like 2 weeks before the Husky invite.
Yeah, I mean, it could have, yeah, it was maybe our last year as roommates, and I was a
Yeah,
solo. Yeah.
yeah. And you ran, I'm pretty sure you'll probably remember the numbers. It was like something like 5:36 per mile for 19 miles.
Yeah, just about. Yeah, maybe 5:37, but yeah, right around
Okay.
there.
Yeah. And I remember this specifically because like we were just there like hyping you up the whole time, playing music, trying to like get you to run faster. We were so stoked about how fit you were at the time. Um, and so I think maybe you put it on Strava or something, and so coach found out about it, and
Yeah.
he like the next on the Tuesday session, he pulled me aside and asked me. He was like, "Hey, did Sydney really run 5:37 for 19 miles when you
Yeah.
drove for him?" And I thought he was excited about it. So I was like, "Oh yeah, coach, it was the coolest thing I've seen." And he just like his face just fell, and I'm sure he cursed. He was like, "Oh shit!" Like, uh, he was because you essentially just completely screwed yourself for the Husky invite coming up.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell you because he didn't want to. He told me
Yeah.
not to say anything. He didn't want to get in your head about the Husky invite.
Yeah.
Is the year before I think you'd ran like 13:36 at Husky, and you were intending to come back and try to run faster. And I don't remember the exact details, but you didn't run as well as you could have, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think I feel like it was perhaps like early January. It might have been more like 4 weeks out.
Okay.
Um, because it was still winter break, and so it was like one of those, like coach was still around, but there wasn't official practice. But I do remember that week because coach asked me not to do a midweek workout, because he was just like that was an incredibly hard effort. I didn't wear like carbon plated shoes or anything like that, and I would have often like tempoed at that pace for half the distance or less. And so I think, yeah, he was worried. He felt like, oh, maybe I had kind of maybe cooked myself for the season. Thankfully, in the shorter term, it wasn't too bad. But I do remember Husky. I mean, if I remember correctly, I think I ran like 13:50, and 7:59 for 3K, and so they were like good times to qualify for nationals. But I remember feeling zapped. I think I'd come off of a cross country season that I was like injured, and I really got like my bearings, in early December into January, and then I just like did that run with like very little base building, and I think like that was kind of the most worrying part is that like I almost ran a marathon at altitude at that pace, and um, it's just not smart training for like somebody who wants to run fast in the 5K. And so yeah, no, I remember that like a lot, and it kind of like I feel like I've been recent in the last couple of weeks I've been having like similar thoughts about other moments that I've run long runs too hard. Honestly, for like um, more recent long runs that I've done, and um, it's made me like it's kind of like been this reflection of back and forth where I think coach's intention for the Sunday long run was for us to maybe get another bit of LT work or aerobic threshold work if we felt great, and only for the last bit of the long run. Um, we started to think that like, oh, we should get out, and out the gate we should run 5:45 pace or whatever it was, and that was obviously too hard, because at altitude, I mean, I think LT pace is like we're probably gonna only be able to hold it for, I don't know, 2 hours, and if we're gonna try to do that for 100 minutes or an hour 40 every weekend over and over, it's like we're gonna be overworking very consistently.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you're kind of touching on, so in like at the beginning of, I think it was the summer of 2017,
Hmm.
which I've since labeled in my memory as like the summer of madness because we just went absolutely nuts with training. And coach sat you and I down together because we both were staying in Alamosa, and
Hmm.
told him we wanted to spend the summer training really hard and getting better. Um, and he sat us down and kind of explained like, okay, like you guys are on your easy runs and like your Wednesday medium long run, you're kind of jogging around at like 7:30 pace. And we're like,
Yeah.
yeah. And he's like, okay, you've been doing that for a couple years, yet you've gotten fitter. So don't you think that your easy pace should maybe just be a little bit faster, or that
Hmm.
midweek long run, or maybe your long run could be a little bit faster? And we kind of took that as, okay, if running faster on our easy days is going to make us fitter, let's run faster on every single easy run that we possibly can. And
Yeah.
we spent that summer getting very, very fit and then just completely imploding.
Yeah.
Which I remember um, at the end of that summer, you put together one week where you ran 100 miles, averaging under 6 minute pace. Um, and
Yeah.
you capped it off with like a sub 14 5K down at sea level at your parents' house. Um,
Yeah.
and then that was kind of, maybe you can talk about it, but that was kind of the end of it for that summer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, this is kind of, well, that cross season that I was injured, was preceded by the summer of madness, because yeah, I think, yeah, we took what coach said very like literally, and we were like, oh, this has to be a change that we make every single day. Whereas, like, I think, yeah, like you said, he probably intended that we maybe focus on some of those long run days, midweek long run days, like we just kind of, run a little quicker for, an extra 10% of our weekly mileage rather than the all of our weekly mileage. But yeah, that summer was, in the moment, it was great. And I think we got in shape super quick. I mean, it was probably like, we took our break after outdoor track, and in like 5 or 6 weeks, we were in the best shape of our lives. I think it does give credit to what coach asked us to do, or I don't want to say he asked us to do that, but what coach had kind of given us information on, where like some of that like higher end work is helpful. I think plodding around at a very, very slow pace is good for recovery, but maybe there's room for some of the aerobic development and the mitochondria building in some of the slightly faster running. I think I see some French athletes, they call it like active. I'll sometimes see their Stravas, they'll label it as like, 60 minutes active versus 60 minutes jogging on a different day. And I think like the idea is that it's not like a workout, but it is just like a little bit more up to, a kind of like a pace that you're focused a little bit, but you're not necessarily working out. And so, um, I think there is some truth to it, and I still believe it. But it's all about getting the dosage right. Or it's about like not introducing too many other components to your training, because it's really hard to do that and try to do, like, it's hard to do a Tuesday session, show up, do kind of a quality mileage day and then come back and then do more aerobic threshold work, because like when you start to put in some higher intensity days, you wanna dip down, and that's when you do run the 7:30 pace day so that you can connect the two high quality days, rather than trying to keep the line almost the I guess the line of intensity the same. You kind of want to dip, and so yeah, I think that's like something that I feel like I'm still figuring out, and um, it's like something that I feel like I'm gonna try to implement this year is adding in a little bit more of that like higher end of easy day or higher end aerobic work, but without pushing it too much. I think me like an example that I was thinking that I was talking with my coach just last week was um, rather than trying to run 5:40 pace for 17, 18 miles, like maybe it's best to run half of it easy and then introduce the pace in the second half, but still take breaks, it could be 10-minute reps where I'm not running quite tempo pace, but I'm running high end aerobic work with a little bit of a break so that I could avoid, crossing a threshold. And I think like that's going to be the more sustainable way, um, compared to just getting out the gate and trying to run, 5:45, like literally out the gate sometimes, I feel like by the time we got onto the dike system, which was, I don't know, 600 meters from where we started practice, we were often like at 6-minute pace. And so that obviously like doesn't put you in a good spot if you have to run another 90 minutes from that point.
Yeah, I remember one time specifically when Jackson and you and we started a long, it must have been summer because we started a long run from our house, which was like
Hmm.
3/4 of a mile to campus.
Yeah.
Uh, before we got to, so we'd go down our street and we would turn left next to those brown apartments.
Hmm.
I forget what the street was called, which is only like a couple hundred meters from our house. We were already at 6-minute pace or below, and Jackson basically just said, "I'm not running with you guys today." Like he was mad that we had convinced him to run with us for that run, and then immediately got below 6-minute pace, and we were like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
our goal is to hold this for the next 17 to 18 miles, and we're gonna go faster." And he
Yeah.
was like, "That's just not fun, so I'm not gonna do that."
Yeah. No, I mean, Jackson had the foresight we needed, you know, definitely.
But yeah, like you're touching on a little bit with like you're talking about how you want to do some long runs now.
Hmm.
I think with the way that our training was at structured at Adams, it was kind of just built in naturally. Like
Hmm.
we would spend the first 5 to 10 miles chatting, um,
Hmm.
and then kind of pick it up because as you get more out on those country roads, it's more lonely. So you might be running alone as the group spreads out. So then you're running harder. Um,
Hmm.
and then we'd come back on what was mostly a paved road, so you were able to pick it up quite a bit.
Hmm.
But also throughout that, we would get breaks for water where coach would drive up in a van, and so
Hmm.
that like lowering of your heart rate and giving your body just a little bit of time to rest and adjust. It was kind of just built in based on the fact that you needed to stop and get water out of the van.
Yeah.
And I wonder how uh, running more professionally now, typically your coach is maybe handing you water while you run
Hmm.
hard. And so if you're pressing and pressing that pace and you're being handed water and you're never stopping because maybe you're doing more like marathon simulation type of work, you're not
Yeah.
getting those breaks built in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, well, I think there's like, it's not like a good way to think of it, but sometimes like we are like, oh, we don't want our elapsed time to be high or whatever, and it's like, it's pretty dumb thing to think of, but sometimes you're motivated by like not stopping, and I think there are days where it is good to not stop if you're doing like a marathon specific session. It is good to, yeah, have this very consistent effort, but that's like when you're really thinking about a marathon and you're doing a marathon specific workout. But I'd say for your average long run on any Sunday, especially if you're training for, a shorter event or even just like not the marathon, even a trail event, where you may find yourself stopping because you are going to an aid station for the sake of the whole race. Like, yeah, stopping is fine. I follow, I don't know, I mean, maybe some listeners also follow Connor Mans, like the American record holder in the marathon. I look at his long runs and he does some very crazy stuff where he'll run 20 to 23 miles where he averages, 5:30 pace for the whole thing, and he'll maybe sometimes add in 4 miles at marathon or faster. But the elapsed time on those runs is sometimes 15 minutes for a 2 hour run or 2 hour 15-minute run. Or the the rest time in between the water breaks is an extra 15 minutes, and it's like he's the best runner the US has, and he's taking the time to stop, to fuel up, to let the heart rate go down, and then he gets back to it, and it's super beneficial. I mean, I think that it's super beneficial because like we live and train at altitude, and so we may think of in the lab setting our LT or our threshold as being a certain pace that we may have tested on a treadmill or in like very good conditions. And, I can think like, oh, my LT pace, I should be able to hold that for 2 hours. But in real world conditions where you have hills or you have wind or your body's in, a slightly different condition, you may approach that threshold faster than in the lab setting. And so to try and avoid hitting your threshold and going beyond it, it's probably best to, yeah, take a break, take some water, kind of bring yourself back down to a baseline, and then start your work again. So yeah, I think like that's my idea, and that's what I would like to do because earlier this year I'd reverted back to trying to run 17 miles at 5:35 pace, and I was doing it, but I think I wasn't really gaining all the benefits because I was running to exhaustion once a week. And I think like, yeah, I was able to like tell myself, yeah, I'm just doing, I'm doing great work. I'm running slower than LT pace, but really by the end of my run, I was spending probably 20 to 30 minutes under LT, under lactic threshold effort, and I was probably like, I was probably, doing damage to my muscles, because I know that spending time under threshold for too long and too often is kind of bad for your mitochondria, it's bad for your muscles. It doesn't allow you to get to the next workout fully rested, just like a host of things, but um that's probably the adjustment that I'll try to make and kind of in real time in my own training.
Awesome. Well, thanks. That's super insightful and introspective. Um, so since you mentioned a little bit about the lab setting, like I said, I didn't want to forget to talk about what Clayton told me so he was doing, must have been when he was a grad assistant because he was doing a study where he needed some athletes to do some VO2 max testing in the lab. Um, and he told me that what was what was really interesting about your VO2 max test, because they also were taking lactate measures, and trying to gauge where your lactic threshold was. And so most people, they get above 4 millimoles of lactate, and they start to fatigue, like between 4 to 6, or they can, like in a 5K race or something, you can go up to 8 and then spend the last lap sprinting, and go all the way
Hmm.
up to maybe like 13 if you're extremely resistant to it.
Hmm.
And he said that what was interesting with you is you got up to 4 millimoles at about the same effort as any other well-trained athlete.
Hmm.
And and then they start to creep the speed up or the incline of the treadmill, which slowly boosts you up to like 8 millimoles. And he said you were able to spend an insane amount of time at 8 millimoles before fatiguing. So
Hmm.
like your ability to buffer lactate at the higher end of threshold, he said, was just like really advanced compared to, this was probably your freshman or sophomore year of college,
Yeah, yeah.
compared to like any other 19-year-old. And then I remembered that you told me, so going back to like the first major win you had in college, I think was probably the Mount Sac invite in
Hmm.
2016.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when I'll link it in the show notes. Like FlowTrack did a video where they're like they did the Miss New Booty song, kind of teasing you about your name.
Yeah.
That like kind of went viral in the small running world. Um,
Hmm.
and so that was just like a fun race. Like that was kind of when you like popped off and really brought people's attention to D2 running, which I want to
Hmm.
talk about a little bit. But you said in that race something that you did was like with a K to go, you did what we called like sort of like a false kick, where you
Hmm.
ramped up the pace as if you were going to hold it to the finish line,
Hmm.
at a pace that like most people wouldn't be able to hold to the finish line. Um,
Yeah.
and you said you held that pace for maybe 400 meters,
Hmm.
and then slightly let off, and so
Yeah.
that your competitors think, okay, he's fatiguing, he went too early. So then they
Hmm.
go and they kick with 600 or 400 to go, and then in reality you feel pretty much fine, and so you have basically like another gear with the last 200. You're able to kind of blow by everyone,
Yeah.
and it was sort of like your trick for someone like you didn't see yourself as someone who had a huge turnover, so it's not like you wanted to risk giving an all out like blasting the last 400. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the reason you were able to do stuff like that was because of that ability to buffer lactate at
Hmm.
those faster paces. That most people are like, most people, they know exactly how to time their kick by like, okay, I can do this pace for 10 laps, and then I'm basically accumulating too much lactate, so I need to kick to the finish, and that's it. And
Yeah.
you had like sort of an extra gear, like gear and a half in there to play with, which um, is probably why you won so many indoor national titles, because you can, with those smaller tracks, you can play with that stuff a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I guess I wouldn't know the perfect science of that, but yeah, it was something that I felt like I did rely on often. And like you said, like I had only ever run like 53 point for 400, and I could run 25 seconds for 200s, which is I think plenty fast to win races, but I didn't often like touch those speeds in a race, and so I thought of myself like, oh, I have to kick off of a fast pace. Like I have to make it so that everyone is kind of revving high, and then I can add another gear to it. And yeah, I felt like I was successful in moments like that, where if things went like my way and we started to ramp things up over the last 2.5 minutes or so, it felt like, oh, okay, like I can kind of hold on. It was tough, but it felt like, oh, okay, I have a little bit more to give over the last like 45 seconds to 30 seconds in the race. And yeah, I'd love to see if that's like something that is still there. I haven't done a lot of lactate testing since then. I've done just one other test, and it was more to create um, like a lactate profile for just like LT1 and LT2. So we didn't really spend a lot of time beyond LT2. Um, and so, yeah, yeah, but hopefully, my dream is to make it back to the track, and I'll certainly like need that skill if I'm gonna find success there.
Yeah, sweet. And then like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit about, so that Mount Sac race and really like your whole first it would have been your redshirt freshman year, your first year competing for Adams. Um, you brought a lot of attention to D2. I think until that point, I know there's been good D2 runners over the years, like Steve Scott was a D2 runner.
Yeah.
They're in the 90s, like Abilene Christian had good runners,
Yeah.
but for a while it had been like if you were a great runner, you went to Division One, and if you were a good runner, you could go to Division One and not go to nationals, or you could go to D2 and maybe get to go to nationals or get to have, more of like a competitive college experience. And then you were kind of the first person in a while that was like seen as a great D2 runner or a great runner in D2. And since then, I think the landscape's totally changed. I think you were part of that. Is like people have started to see some great runners in Division Two and going, well, it doesn't matter which division I go to, like Division Two, Division Three, NAIA. If I get paired up with a good coach and a good program, I could run really well anywhere.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, I think when I was younger, I didn't, that's one of those things that I didn't think about. I remember telling some of my competitors that I raced in high school. Like I'm thinking of going to Adams State. It's Division 2, and there were kids that were right around my level, and they're just like, oh, why would you do that? Why not go to CU? It's also in Colorado. Um, that's like something I didn't necessarily care about. I met Coach Martin in California, and we had several conversations, and I felt like his investment was a little bit different the to the one other coach that I really went far in the process with. Um, and so it like I guess like I felt like I paid attention to my own like personal development more so than anything. I thought like, oh, I want to be a professional runner. I want to um I want to have success after college, and what's going to set me up to do that the best. And yeah, yeah, I mean, Adams State felt like it was the natural choice.
Do you have any favorite memories from Adams State or anything that just really stands out from living in Alamosa?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in terms of like competitive memories, I enjoyed winning as like both the men's and the women's in 2017, like winning cross on the men's and women's team. I thought that was like a like like my own personal race was fun. It was, the cross race that I finished furthest back, and so kind of in that team aspect, like that was super fun to kind of play a slightly different role than maybe I expected out of myself, typically. But then living in Alamosa, I feel like it wasn't any one moment. It was just kind of like the day to day of it. Like summer of 2017 was a lot of fun, even though we kind of let ourselves like, maybe we misguided each other by egging each other on like what we were doing. It's like moments like that where we were just like, we're gonna be so good. Like we're waking up early and we're drinking our coffee and then getting out for a workout, and like just doing everything together was a lot of fun. And so it was, it's like that became so much more of like the smaller moments when it was in town and in Alamosa. But yeah, so yeah, I think having good roommates was good, and having a good team. It's something that I like think about to this day. Obviously, like our lives have grown for the better. You have a kid, and I've been married recently, and just like we're kind of hoping to be like you guys in the next few years. That is for the better. But it's like these are like those stories are like what I'll probably tell my kids.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's It's like those times where you're just with friends and with teammates, and I don't even remember, some of the performances. Like it's not like the performances are connected with those memories. They're kind of
Yeah.
like separate from each other in my mind. It just is like this was a really good time, and maybe that very weekend went and had like a terrible race, but they're not
hmm
connected in my brain.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, and it makes it all, I mean, it's like the reason why we are still doing it is that like we've probably, if we tallied all of our races, it's like we've had more bad ones than good ones. But it's like we stay because like the good memories with maybe the bad races and also the good memories with the good races are a little bit more powerful.
Awesome. Okay. So after Adams, you moved to Boulder, um, and you trained for a couple of years with the Tinman Elite team, with
hmm
Tom Schwartz as your coach, and
hmm
you had some really good performances there. You ran 13:22 for 5K. Again, maybe one of the fastest times since 2020 without super shoes.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
then,
I bet I could dig something out.
okay, 28:15 for 10K, 44:46 for 15K, and 46:36 for 10 miles. And was that a sixth place finish at the USA 10 mile champs?
No, no, that was for 46:36. That was probably with Roots. It was like early
Okay,
Roots.
okay,
Yeah, yeah, it
so
was, and it was like a broad street run and a good
right,
race. But
okay,
yeah,
so you did have a high finish for at 10 mile champs under Tom, right?
I did. Yeah, it was actually my first race with Tin Man. I ran like I think 47:14 I think for 10 miles. Um, and yeah, that was like my first try at road racing and yeah, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was I think I was eighth place in 47:14
Okay, okay,
and
cool.
yeah, in 2019.
Okay, cool. Can you talk just a little bit about how was the training with Tin Man? How was it maybe different from Adams? And what are some things that you feel like you did really well there and what you've taken away from it?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say, for Adams, we like I feel like I give a lot of credit to the aerobic tempo or aerobic threshold work. But with Tom, like I think that was a part, it was folded into the training, but it wasn't an important piece. I think if anyone has like consumed any Tom Schwartz content, whether it's like talks or lectures about his training, I think like his big thing is CV, which is critical velocity, and we did a lot of work targeting that, and that's like roughly 30 to 35 minute race pace, um, and so it's like something that is like maybe a little bit easier to explain to an athlete, versus like it felt like for me for aerobic threshold, like the early tempo stuff at Adams, it took me a while to really understand why we did it and what feeling I was searching for. But with CV, it was like, oh, just go a touch slower than 10K pace. And we would do lots of fartleks, like early season. We would do a workout that he kind of coined, that he liked, he just called it 777. And so the emphasis on 7 times 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, like very easy jog. The idea is that it was CV pace. We would do it on dirt roads, on hilly terrain. It wasn't really 10K pace, in terms of like the actual paces that we ran. I'd say like his big thing that I enjoyed personally was that he adjusted efforts often. And so it wasn't 10K pace, but it was the idea was that it was 10K pace for that day and for that terrain and for that very like the very specific conditions. And so it was like, oh, what do you think you could run 10K in this gravel road? Okay, that's like the rough pace that you're gonna run. And so yeah, we did plenty of that, and I think that made me fit pretty quickly compared to the aerobic work. Because again, I think it's a little bit closer to that effort that we probably touched in cross country in college. It was a little bit more, just like higher end work, it was a little bit more quality. And so I was able to get in shape in 6, 8 weeks. I was able to run 47 minutes for 10 miles. And because I was able, just because I jumped into like some more intense workouts and like higher effort a little sooner compared to the previous 5 years. And so yeah, I mean, I started with him in fall of 2019, kind of had some success. I had some issues with like low ferritin, which has kind of been something that's gotten to me frequently in my running career. And so then I had like a pretty long period of, just underperforming compared to what I wanted to do. And over the last 6 months that I was with Tinman, I really re-ramped up and I found some consistency. I ran my first half marathon. I ran 62:32 for half marathon, and that like COVID period where races were starting to kind of come back up, and so it was kind of like a backyard half marathon in Michigan. It was like barely a race, but I ran fast, and that was like enough to kind of catapult me into a season where I ran 28:15 for 10K and 13:22 for 5K, and then I was able to compete at the Olympic trials in on the track for the 5,000. And yeah, I mean, the work that we did was, I felt like it was rooted in just like some old concepts, like some tried and true concepts. So nothing bad at all. But, I'd say like after a good period of working CV, we would start to just like hit VO2 workouts, or VO2 pace, VVO2 pace. And so we would start with like one week we, did 600s at, at roughly 3K, 5K pace. The next week we did 800s, then 1200s, then miles. And then that kind of like led into a small racing period. And I felt like that gave me a lot of success. Like it was easy to build week by week. I feel like mentally, um, if I were to tie it to some of those workouts that I did in high school, like I would do 4 by mile and I would just start doing 4 by mile like, in February, and it was a bit of a shock to the system. Whereas with Tom, we would start with 600s at VO2 and it was decently hard, but it wasn't out of this world. And we would do 5 to 7 reps, 5 to 7 by 600 at first, and we would shoot for roughly 3K to 4K worth of work at VO2, or at VVO2. Um, and then aside from that, we would like layer it with other components of training. And so we would start with like a couple threshold reps. Maybe it's like 2 to 3 by 1 mile at, threshold on the track. That might have been five flat to 505, somewhere, something like that. And then we would do, the 600s, and then we'd finish it off with like some speed. So, we'd kind of get this varied workout where we're hitting a bunch of different, um, paces or efforts that were important to the 5K. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I find that to be like very good. But again, like comparing it to Adams, it was maybe a little bit less catered to that like long-term approach of like, oh, what are we going to do in 5 years, or what are we going to do even next year? It was very much rooted in how fast can we get, you know, in 2 to 3 months. And I think there's a lot of value in that because sometimes like the timelines that we have are, just a couple months away, but um, I never had that consistency of like, oh, I didn't feel like I was much better at the end of my time with Tin Man than at the beginning, because like I think I didn't necessarily do that like aerobic development. I just kind of, um, I would just have periods of working out pretty hard and then like long periods of breaks. And part of that I think was COVID. Part of that was my own like personal health with like low iron or just like low energy levels. Like it was hard for me to kind of get a lot of consistent work in that period. So couldn't say it's all based on that system, but
Do you think that's also maybe kind of just the nature of running professionally? And like you got into, you're basically entering into professional running and you feel like I have to perform now. Like I have to find a way to make this work. Otherwise, I need to go work full time doing something else. Um,
yeah,
or do you think that's also just part of the type of training? It sounds like it's, like you said, a little bit less aerobic based, a little more like compact and dense, which seems to get people fit quickly, but not
hmm
with as much long term development in mind.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think yeah, that's definitely the biggest motivation. It's like even just like talking with like teammates or friends that run in Boulder. It's like yeah, that is kind of because we are adults and because we don't have this like next stage of our career, it's like yeah, we feel like yeah, like if I could run super fast tomorrow, I would, I'd make that happen. Um, and so yeah, it is the nature of it. And at the time, I was like working part time, and so I was like trying to limit the amount of work that I did, but I was also and like I was trying to potentially make money racing on the roads. And so yeah, the idea is that like, oh, if I can make a few $100 or a couple $1,000 at this race, that's gonna remove a little bit of pressure when it comes to work and like paying for the essentials at home. And so, yeah, I don't think the training was bad at all. I think it just served a different purpose than what we wanted at Adams because at Adams, like I think coach wants us to have an amazing 1 to 2 years, last 1 to 2 years of college and then a good transition onto the professional world. And yeah, I think with Tom, I think the thing that like perhaps that I gain and I still think about now is some of that other work is super important. And at Adams, I was able to like do so well with mostly aerobic development and with like touches of speed throughout the season. But with Tom, I think knowing the knowing that I could kind of maximize my aerobic fitness a little bit more was like kind of what I gained out of it because like I said, I feel like I ran 13:22, and so I think I was roughly in the same shape as when I ran 13:29 in college, but I had like slightly different skill sets. Um, I was in the gym a little bit more often. I was like the heaviest I ever was at the time that I ran 13:22, and I think part of that was because I'd gained muscle. I'd just become like a slightly different athlete, and I'd maximized my fitness and or optimized my fitness in a slightly different way. I was, I'd like to think I was a little bit more athletic when I ran 13:22 versus when I ran 13:29 because I had like a little bit more speed, like a little bit more versatility, like on the track, like where I was able to run some pretty good workouts and I was able to run 150s and 200s at paces that I didn't typically run in college. So.
Awesome, cool. And then so from there, you started training with Roots Running with Richie Hansen,
Mhm.
um, and you ran super fast at half marathon, 61:09, which at the time was, I think, the number 16 USA all time half marathon. You ran 2:14 in the marathon and competed in the Olympic trials in the marathon.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about how that training was different and what the focus was with roots and maybe why that led to some more success at the longer distances.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the roots running system is just it's V-Hill based. It's not like, I guess we didn't really touch on the background of Adams State training in this podcast, but yeah, Coach Joe V-Hill is kind of what built the Adams State history, and he's just gone on to influence so many coaches, and Richie Hansen being one of them, um, and yeah, and so it was definitely just based on that. It was a lot of like marathon work, like even before I debuted for a marathon, like I was doing some like long workouts where I would vary pace, whether I'd go like you know 2 miles on, half mile off, like half mile float more so than off, um, and then back to 2 miles on, and it's like I was doing like a lot of long extended work, and that catered to the long road racing, and so I
So
had
what are some of those paces? Like if you're doing 2 miles on, what's that pace? What's the float at? And then what's the pace when you come back on?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't remember the exact paces for a specific workout, but it's like maybe I would run 450 to 455 for the 2 mile reps, so maybe 940 to 950. We would float a half mile, and I may run 530 pace. The fitter I got, you know the faster I could float. Yeah, so it's like 450 on, 530-ish off, and then you just repeat probably 3 times if you're a half marathoner. If you're a marathoner, you may repeat that up to 5 or 6 times. And so yeah, like that kind of work it felt like foreign to me. It came to me fairly quickly, because that's like the skill that I felt like I had kind of all through the years. But yeah, I was so used to like stopping or jogging very slowly. And so floating was like something that was kind of a challenge in the first few weeks, but you know, I kind of was like a quick learner to it. And I mean, within 6 weeks of joining Roots, I ran like the 46:36 10 mile. Whereas earlier in the year, I ran 15K, which, just shy of 10 miles in like 44:45 or something like that. So I ran like 4:48 pace for about 10 miles. And then 6 months later, I ran 4:39 pace. And I think a lot of it was due to just like me getting into that system pretty quickly and then practicing that kind of like long sustained work. Um, Even if we were dipping slightly below like threshold, I guess, with the float, like I wasn't running 4:39 pace for more than a few minutes at a time, but I would get back to it and just over and over in a session. And um, so yeah, yeah, no, I think like it was great for me. It's like I kind of worked the start of 2021. I worked that speed and became a really good 5K runner, and um, in the second half, I became a really good road racer. And um, I don't know if it's exactly tied to a concept you've told me, but it's like the idea of like pushing up your threshold and pulling up your threshold by working, paces under threshold or paces well over threshold. Um, but it felt like that's kind of what I did, like I was becoming a little bit more well-rounded, because I had, historically maybe spent a little bit more time, you know, building the aerobic base, and then spent a lot of time working kind of that higher end VO2 work for a few months there, like getting ready for the trials on the track. And then I got back to the the aerobic work again. Yeah, that led to 61 minutes, and yeah, yeah. So I'm still chasing that, but hopefully I'll get it again.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like like you're saying, it sounds like you really benefited from basically both systems going. Like I said, you're pushing or pulling at your threshold, whether it's you're kind of leveling up some of your faster systems and shorter systems, and that makes running at thresholds a little bit easier. Or if you're pressing and pressing on your threshold by staying at it for a long time, you're you're able to continue at threshold for longer.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot of athletes seem to benefit. Maybe they've spent a couple of years with one coach or system, and then they switch to a different system, and you have these kind of jumps in fitness.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I think maybe it's like something that I took one X-Phys class in college, but maybe like we touched up on, there are microcycles, and it's like, what do you do week to week or month to month, and um, there are also like, I guess like, is it mesocycle? Is that maybe the term?
Yeah, I think you
Uh,
can use meso or macro cycles. Yeah.
or macro? Yeah, yeah. And so, I feel like that's maybe that's like maybe something that like I guess I maybe I was touching up on that, or maybe that's like what I kind of not intentionally did, but I just ended up doing where, the first half of the year I focused on track work and speed. Second half of the year I focused on strength, and it benefited me greatly at the end of both of those cycles. And yeah, it's like something that, I feel like out as an athlete I don't really think about that often. Again, like I sometimes think about like specific workouts and I give a lot of credit to a workout, but it is it is kind of what you do for weeks and months. Um, and then you could also pair specific periods of weeks and months with other periods of weeks and months, and then you you get something slightly different out of it when you kind of like couple them in the right way.
Right. Yeah. No, for myself, I wish I knew how to, make that 5 year plan that is going to combine all those cycles and hit every system perfectly. But
Yeah.
sometimes it just happens, due to life, like maybe you change teams or maybe you move to a different city or things like that. Um, so can you talk a little bit about what you're doing now? Like what are you excited about? What's next? How are you going to kind of use all that you've gained and learned through these different coaches to help yourself now?
I'm currently with a team called the track club, and um I have a coach who's in Boulder. His name is Evan Schwartz, and I think like it feels like with the way that my career has gone, I really have to like rebuild the way that I set goals, and I want it to be in the same way that I have in the past. But I think like coming off of the last couple of years of running the marathon, I felt like I underperformed in the marathon, and so I want to rebuild myself as an athlete um and race, the 5K again. I want to, run the shorter distances and gain kind of the confidence that I built over the years by running fast again and running, relatively fast compared to my marathon pace. And so yeah, that's like really my kind of broad goal, is to just like start racing again and start performing well, but also by collaborating with my coach and um, yeah, definitely bringing up like some of the moments that I've had success. I've like called you, Brian, like just to be like, what do you think about, what do you think about this workout, or what do you think about this period and at Adams that we, trained together? I feel like I haven't always been insightful or retrospective with my training, but right now it feels very important that I do that because, I've created like patterns uh, in the way that I like think and the way that I train, the way that I build confidence. It's like, sometimes it's like not perfect to the science, Sometimes it's like that emotional piece or that mental piece that like really kicks in. And so, yeah, I'm hoping to like use the lessons that I've gained through the years to collaborate with Evan um and yeah, and just like become a 5K runner again. That's like my dream. I think if you ask me whether I'd win a gold, whether I'd rather have like whether I'd have a gold medal in the marathon or the 5K, I'd probably choose the 5K 10 times out of 10. Um, I think that's like the stuff that, you know, makes me excited to train, and the marathon is also very exciting. I think I wouldn't sell that short. It's just I know that like that excitement comes from that piece that I built, now like a decade ago. And so yeah, in terms of the workouts, I think I'd like to focus on like a lot of LT work, you know, again, that feels like that piece that creates the biggest space and the biggest long-term benefits. Um, you know, touching up on the maybe, once a week LT work, maybe a little bit more broken up so that I could do more of it. Maybe I could do double workouts eventually, double threshold. And then I think another part is that we touched upon earlier was like the long runs. Like I'd like to do long runs where I'm intentionally, hovering just below LT, but with like programmed breaks, or fixed breaks where, I am running 10 to 15 minutes at a pretty good pace, and then I'm taking a short break for just water, whether it's like 30, 45 seconds just to catch a breath and and get back to the pace. I think like that piece feels like a very small adjustment, but something that will like help me sustain that kind of training for a lot longer. Um, and I think one thing that like we've been touching up on is something that Evan calls economy work, and it's very similar to those early high school workouts that I did with where it was like short reps and short rest. And I think it certainly makes me feel good. I think the science of it is from what Evan has said, and maybe I think you'll know more than me, Brian, is that like he, the short rest allows you to run at a pretty fast pace, whether it's like 10K to 5K effort for 400 meters, but then short rest of like 30 seconds doesn't allow you to rest completely, and so you continue to, is it like shuttle lactate, um,
Yeah,
so that you can continue to like be in that like rough zone. And so if these are your two lines, you can kind of bounce between them over and over. Um, that way you're working pretty hard for 30, 40 minutes, but you're running a pretty fast pace for about two-thirds of that time, and you're resting for about a third of that time.
right. Yeah, no, I've been watching some of your Strava and seen that you're doing a lot of that. And I like to think of it as like you said, Evan calls it like efficiency work, and in my mind, it's like the work is like compacted. Uh,
Hmm.
the intervals are compacted. Yeah, it seems like you're doing a lot of stuff to kind of shuttle that lactic in and out and train your body to deal with it, and then also use it as energy. You can do it for, like you said, like 30 minutes at a time, or like famously, I think Tim Chariot or Noradine Morsely would do like 10 times 300 with just a
Hmm.
100 meters jog recovery. And they're running at like a much higher intensity, but with the same idea that you're just putting your body in that state of where you're definitely not clearing the lactate as fast as you need to keep running there, and then that short recovery gives you maybe just enough time to do it, and then you're back at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that you're doing that, and that's just kind of fun, exciting stuff. Yeah, I appreciate that you've occasionally reached out to me as a resource. if just to talk about training, or I appreciate that you sometimes take my unsolicited advice when I'll text you out of the blue, let you know
No,
what
no,
I
always.
let you know what I thought about a workout you did on Strava or about a race that you had.
Mhm.
So yeah, maybe is there anything else that you're up to in training that you're really excited about, or something that you want to get to? Like you mentioned that you might like to mess around with some double threshold stuff. It doesn't sound like you've really done any of that, whereas that seems to be like the trend and the rage right now is all sorts of college and professional athletes are messing around with double threshold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have done in the past with Tom. I mean, I guess we did do like a double workout system for a little bit. Um, but it wasn't, it would be a threshold session in the morning typically, and then in the afternoon we would do the VO2 work. And so it wasn't necessarily uh double threshold. Um, and it was pretty short-lived. And so I felt like, you know, that's like something that I could probably gain from. I think Evan is a little bit more of a, I think he's not as big of a fan of it if we haven't maximized single threshold. And I think yeah, there is some value in that because I do generally want to run longer races. And so I think that, doing two sessions of 4 to 6 miles each of work is maybe not as beneficial for a marathoner as doing one session where I'm doing, you know, 8 miles, 8 to 10 miles of work in the morning. And so, I think there are trade-offs. When I think of people doing double threshold, I think of track runners currently. Obviously there's the Ingebrigtsen family, like they're, you know, solely, 5K, 1500 runners. And so it's like, it makes sense that like for them, they do have to pay attention to the volume that they do in one session because they do want to preserve themselves for a very specific 1500 session during the week. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I've played around recently with like some up tempo doubles. The goal not being to cross over into LT1, and so I'll jump on this treadmill after maybe one of those economy days where we're doing, maybe in the morning I'm doing like 8 by 400 with 30 seconds rest, 8 by 300 with 40 seconds rest just to get around the curve, and then like some 200s at the end. That's like an example morning session. And then in the evening, I'm doing like 20 to 30 minutes of just like high level, high aerobic work on the treadmill where I'm doing, reps of 6 to 10 minutes, um, with like 30 to 40 seconds rest, just enough for me to step off the treadmill, take a sip of water, kind of calm down for a second, and then just jump back on. And so that's been something that's kind of been fun, and it's like it feels like this kind of like experimentation that I get to do like just at home, and I hope I really hope it works out because it is a lot of fun. It makes me feel pretty good. Um, I think that it's like the effort is just like this level where I feel great, but it never gets hard. And so I'll usually finish the workout and I'm like energetic because I've just kind of worked up my system a little bit, but it's never gotten to the point where anything burns or anything hurts. And so, I guess that's like something that I try to be transparent on on Strava. It's something that's fun and so yeah, yeah. I mean, but I am open to anything. I'm 29, and so uh, if I'm lucky, I'll get another decade of highly competitive running. But at minimum, a few more years, um, and I'm willing to try anything that's like exciting and fun, and um, but also will give me like measurable results.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited to see what you're gonna do. Like you said, you're only 29. I think you're just still just getting started, especially in the marathon world.
Hmm.
I'm excited to see you piece everything together from all the great coaches and systems you've been a part of. Um, I had one more question about that. So you've worked with a lot of good coaches over the years. Um,
Hmm.
have you ever received any just really good coaching advice from any of those coaches, or what's something that maybe some of those coaches did that made them great coaches?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I feel like I don't have advice from them, but like I think the things that I latch onto with the coaches, like Coach Martin being kind of the the coach that's given me the most success. And I feel like the talent that he has as a coach is like making a good connection with an athlete. I think like for him it's like very personal, it's very um like he gets to know you as an athlete and he gets to know you as a person, and that helped me thrive. I think when we talk about like keeping a high lactate reading for a long time, like I think part of that is like an emotional and a mental piece where I couldn't just do that right now, like I couldn't just get on the treadmill and do that because like at this exact moment there's nothing that I'm like fighting for, nothing that I have to hold it for. But um I think for like Coach Martin, it's like he he created that like the drive like so early in my career that like felt like I could have run through a brick wall for him, like at my strongest moments. And um I think like yeah, getting to know your coach is is huge, because sometimes people look at it as like a transactional thing where, this is my coach, he gives me workouts, I do them, I go home, but um I think getting to know someone, creating a relationship I'd like to say it's half or more of the piece, because I have been with multiple different coaches through the years, and I think they've all been very good in terms of the science that they brought in, but not all of them have gotten me to get everything out of myself in the same way that Coach Martin has. You know, many roads lead to Rome, and but I think that like it's without being too cliche, it's like sometimes like it's the enjoyment of that road. It's like there's um there's like so much more to sport than just the accolades, and the accolades are going to be celebrated every time. And um I do run for the goals as well, but um I guess yeah, like making the tough boring moments fun is something that I'll always like remember from Coach Martin.
Awesome, thank you. That reminded me of something I wanted to ask you about, which was uh, I think it was Coach Martin asked you to share this with us, or it just came up because he asked you to maybe share with it was a team or a camp or something like um, how you get yourself hyped up for a race. Do you remember? Do you know what story I mean? And
Yeah.
it was the time when basically all of us, your teammates, realized that you were operating on a completely different level of like being locked in and just insane for the sport. So do you want to share that story?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it was at high school camp, and yeah, like I think one of the kids asked us just like our routine on race day maybe. And yeah, for me, I think I just like was like, oh, I go for a short jog, like, you know, 50 minutes before the race, I go for a short jog. I'll do everything, get on my shoes, go for the jog, and before I do drills and change into my racing shoes and everything like that, I'd always try to like find a quiet moment to, just to like hype myself up. And sometimes the best place to do that was like the bathroom or a porta potty or something like that. And, I would just give myself like a bit of a pep talk of like what I wanted to do, like kind of like pumping myself up in just this quiet space wherever it was. And it was like something that was very, it was a part of the ritual, and it was just like a great time. Like it was a great thing for me to do because I could kind of shut out like the world a little bit because you're it's like if you're at a track meet, there's like guns going off, or like the starter guns going off, and a lot of people that may want to talk to you, or whatever. And sometimes finding like a quiet moment to yourself was like super beneficial. It's strange when we talk about that the Mount Sac race. Like I remember like the full setting of that warm up because like I went out for my like 15-minute jog. I came back, I like took a sip of water, went to the porta potty, and just like stood in there for like a minute and pumped myself up, and then got ready to run. And yeah, I ran like I PR'd by 8 seconds to win Mount Sac. And um, it's like it led into the one of my most memorable races, and it was just this like little moment that I took for myself.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. I just remember it was like we just all realized that like Sydney's locking himself in a bathroom and giving himself a pep talk while the rest of us are kind of like jogging around and joking around or like just lazily throwing on our spikes or whatever. And it was kind of a moment where we realized that you were completely locked in. And like you said, maybe it was because Coach Martin built that relationship, because we had like that team relationship where performing well for the team mattered so much to you.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there's a lot that can be taken from that. Um, do you have any advice for anyone who wants to be a really great runner? Maybe there's someone right now in high school who's, you know, they think they could be good. They're not sure exactly what to do. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to go down a path of being really good at running?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think touching up on that earlier in the conversation, we talked about consistency and um, how I've been like lucky to have run like 10 miles a day for the last um, for the last decade. And I think like that's maybe not realistic to say just run 10 miles a day for a decade, um, but I think finding like a level that you can be consistent at, whether it is running 3 times a week or 5 times a week, like I think like that routine and is like something that like that's like helped me, like there have been moments in my career that I've had to put running on a slight backseat, but I've kind of like kept it in the back of my mind. And you know often going through the motions is not the way that you want to go about something that you like. But sometimes to preserve it, you have to like deload your brain. Not you can't be intense about running every day or every week, but you can find like a level that is sustainable and that you can kind of keep yourself in touch with what you love to do. You know, um, I think it's like you said, for your example with your coach, he was like, don't try to run 70 miles a week if you're only gonna drop off. If you're gonna get injured within a couple of weeks, it's best to have these reps that you've done consistently through the years. Um, and so yeah, I think like there are times where it is just best to take a half step back and still kind of feel yourself tethered to your passion, but also being able to focus on something that's maybe more important at the moment, whether that's family um, or just any other thing. But you still have this like kind of wire that's leading you to the passion that you have. You never want to like close that off completely. And I think yeah, yeah, in the years there have been weeks that I've run only 50 or 60 miles, and, not by choice or not like with intention, but I think I've like kind of made it through that moment to come back and run 100 miles a week because I've just kind of kept that cord alive. And um, so, yeah, I think consistency is that big piece, but it doesn't really mean it's the numbers that are consistent. It's just kind of this like keeping the dream alive, is I feel like something that Pablo Vigil, like an Adams State legend, would kind of tell me over and over. And yeah, finding a way to keep the dream alive, even if that means you do a little bit less, is kind of what that sums up to be.
Awesome. Thank you. Sweet. Well, thanks, dude. Thanks for sitting down and talking to me for so long. Thanks for going and doing a deep dive on some of that training. I wish we could spend 2 more hours on each of those periods in your training, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, hopefully another time. And yeah, I mean, just, I think if there are ever any questions for anyone that listens, like, I can always like ask me in my DMs or comment on my Strava or whatever, and I can do my best to answer any specific questions.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.